The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday, thin and unassuming, the kind of envelope you'd normally toss onto the counter and forget about. I almost did. It had my Aunt Margaret's name on it, written in a stiff, old-fashioned hand by a law office 3 counties away. Margaret was the quiet relative no one talked about much, the one who vanished to the countryside decades ago and only sent Christmas cards with pressed flowers taped inside. I slit the envelope open without much thought. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. She was gone, and she had left me everything. Not a house, not a savings account, 1,300 acres of land. At first, it didn't even feel real. My mind tried to picture it, failed, and defaulted to disbelief. 1,300 acres sounded like a number you hear in movies, not something that suddenly belonged to a guy who'd been living paycheck to paycheck and renting a 2-bedroom apartment with creaky floors. The letter said the land had been in her name for decades, passed quietly through family lines no one paid attention to. What it didn't say, what I would learn soon enough, was that sitting right in the middle of that land was an entire homeowners association. An HOA with opinions, an HOA with rules, an HOA that, apparently, thought they owned me. When I drove out there for the first time, the place looked peaceful enough. Rolling fields, old trees lining a private road, a cluster of tidy suburban homes arranged like a postcard-perfect neighborhood. Freshly painted fences, manicured lawns, decorative signs welcoming visitors to Oak Hollow Estates. It was almost charming, in a fake, curated sort of way. The moment I parked near the main office, the charm evaporated. A woman in her late 40s stormed out before I could even shut my car door. Perfect hair, designer sunglasses, clipboard clutched to her chest like a weapon. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't say hello. You can't park there, she snapped. Residents only. I calmly introduced myself and explained why I was there. Her expression flickered, not with surprise, but irritation, like I'd interrupted her day by existing. Oh, she said slowly, drawing the word out. You're the heir. That was my first red flag. Not condolences. Not welcome. Just the heir. As if I were a minor inconvenience in a much larger plan. She introduced herself as Linda, the HOA president. Within 5 minutes, she was explaining the standing agreement they had with my aunt. According to her, Oak Hollow Estates had been leasing the land beneath their homes for decades at a community-friendly rate. She stressed that phrase several times. Community-friendly, reasonable, fair. What she didn't mention until later was that the rate hadn't changed in over 20 years. What she definitely didn't mention was how they'd treated my aunt. I found out about that part the hard way. Over the next few weeks, as probate wrapped up and paperwork cleared, I started digging through Margaret's old files. Boxes of letters, emails printed and neatly filed, notices from the HOA, complaints, threats disguised as reminders, fines for imaginary violations on land that wasn't even part of their neighborhood footprint, requests for maintenance they weren't entitled to, and, worst of all, legal pressure when she pushed back. They'd worn her down, an elderly woman living alone, surrounded by an aggressive HOA that knew exactly how to bully someone who didn't have the energy to fight. They'd frozen rent adjustments, delayed payments, leveraged legal jargon until she gave up. And while she struggled quietly, they built equity, raised property values, and acted like kings sitting on borrowed ground. That's when the anger set in. Not loud anger, cold anger. The kind that waits. I scheduled a formal meeting with the HOA board. Linda showed up with 6 others, all wearing the same practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. They spoke to me like I was a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. They explained that, traditionally, the rent stayed the same. They explained that a sudden increase would be harmful to the community. They explained that they expected me to honor my aunt's wishes. I listened. I nodded. I took notes. Then I explained something to them. Margaret hadn't frozen the rent out of kindness. She'd done it because she was tired. Because she was sick. Because fighting them took more energy than she had left. Her wishes, as documented in her will, were simple, fair market value. Nothing more. Nothing less. Linda laughed. Actually laughed. You can't just triple the rent overnight, she said, like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That's not how this works. I slid a folder across the table. It contained the updated lease terms, calculated by an independent land appraiser. Comparable land rates, adjusted for inflation, adjusted for usage, adjusted for the fact that they had built an entire subdivision on land they did not own. The new rate was nearly 3 times what they'd been paying. The room went silent. One board member turned pale. Another started flipping through the pages with trembling hands. Linda's smile vanished. "This is outrageous," she said sharply. "We'll sue." "You can try," I replied calmly. "But you won't win. Because here's the thing about contracts. When you rely on intimidation instead of legality, you forget to protect yourself properly." Their lease renewal clause was weak. Outdated. Barely enforceable. And I had lawyers now. Good ones. They left that meeting furious. The next morning, my phone exploded. Emails. Voicemails. Letters threatening legal action. Claims that I was destroying a community. One particularly dramatic message accused me of emotional terrorism. Another suggested that my aunt would be ashamed of me. That one almost made me laugh. Then the real pressure began. HOA members started showing up at the edges of my land, taking photos, trying to document violations. They posted about me in community forums, painting me as a greedy outsider trying to rob hardworking families. Linda went on a local radio segment and spoke vaguely about predatory landlords. I stayed quiet. I let the deadline pass. When rent day arrived, less than half of them paid. The rest withheld payment, clearly believing that sheer numbers would protect them. That if enough people refused, I'd back down like my aunt had. Instead, I sent notices. Formal, legal, and unambiguous. Pay within 30 days, or the lease would be terminated. That's when panic set in. HOA meetings turned into shouting matches. Longtime neighbors accused the board of mismanagement. People demanded to see the original lease terms. Some discovered for the first time that they didn't actually own the land under their homes. Linda tried to rally them, but her voice didn't carry like it used to. A week before the deadline, she showed up at my office unannounced. She didn't bring a clipboard this time. She brought desperation. "We can negotiate," she said, her tone suddenly reasonable. "Maybe not triple, maybe double, or we can do a gradual increase." I looked at her and thought about Margaret. About those letters. About the way she'd been cornered and dismissed. "No," I said simply. The final payments came in late, rushed, incomplete. A few households scraped together the money. Others didn't. I enforced the terms exactly as written. The lawsuits they threatened never materialized. Their attorneys knew better. Instead, they turned on each other. Board members resigned. Linda disappeared from public view entirely. Oak Hollow Estates survived, but changed. Rent went up. Rules loosened. Transparency became mandatory. And for the first time, the HOA remembered what it meant to negotiate instead of dominate. Sometimes I drive past the neighborhood at sunset. The houses are still there. The lawns still trimmed. But the arrogance is gone. People wave now. They know whose land they're standing on. And they know I'm not my aunt.